This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Red Lagoe about her latest collection, Impulses of a Necrotic Heart. Red Lagoe is the author of the imminent novella In Excess of Dark, available from Darklit Press in March, as well as her upcoming novel, Bloodstains by Gaslight. Previous collections include Lucid Screams and Dismal Dreams. Red was a staff writer for Crystal Lake Publishing's Stillwater Bay series and the editor of Nightmare Sky, an anthology of astronomical horror. She's also the founder of Death Knell Press, an independent publishing company for macabre fiction. When she's not torturing herself with work, she can be found behind a telescope enjoying her first love, amateur astronomy. Welcome to the show, Red.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Here's an icebreaker. You're out alone at night with your eye to the telescope. What is the scariest possible thing you could see?
The scariest possible thing I could see would be the things lurking on Earth. The things lurking on Earth.
So you're not afraid of anything in the sky?
I'm not afraid of anything in the sky. I know I should be. I should have this sense of fear of some kind of imminent danger because of the vastness of it, because of asteroids or whatever might be lurking out there. But I fear more of the real horrors that lurk on Earth than I do what's up in space. When I go out stargazing, I do get scared, but it's because I'm out alone at night.
So astronomy is an escape from all the earthly horror?
Yeah, I guess it is. It can be an escape. It's also grounding though, which doesn't quite make sense when I get that way.
I think it makes total sense.
Yeah, the stars, they're always there. Even on a cloudy day, they're up there and I can rely on them. No matter what's going on in life, I can look up and I know where the stars are.
I think that if light pollution were not such a problem, our entire civilization would be more grounded and sane. I think if we looked up every night and saw the vastness of the cosmos and the insignificance of life on Earth, I think it would humble us.
It would be nice for people to be able to look up and see again what it used to look like before technology, before the electric light bulb kind of drowned out the sky, and people used to be able to see it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I always encourage people to get out to dark skies when they can, to be able to look up and actually see the Milky Way.
Whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in upstate New York. It's actually central New York, not far from Syracuse. I just call it upstate because most people who think of New York think of the city, so I just say upstate.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people who are actually from upstate, up in the mountains, they'll let you know that Syracuse is not upstate; it's central New York.
Yeah, you're all Southerners to the people that live beyond the wall.
Yeah. So yeah, I grew up in one stoplight town. I grew up in the 80s. I'm a 79 baby, so my childhood was the 80s and my teen years were the 90s. So I grew up on 80s slashers. There weren't a lot of rules about what I wasn't allowed to watch. My mom introduced me to Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and then we'd watch that with her.
Those both had good runs in the 80s.
Oh yeah, they did. My brothers, they were older than me. They were renting every terrible 80s slasher movie you can think of at the Action Video in town. And so, yeah, I grew up on 80s horror. I can't even remember the first horror movie I ever saw because I was so young when I started watching them.
There was this one summer where my older sister, or oldest sister, I should say, worked two jobs. One was at the ice cream parlor and one was at the video store. So she was allowed to bring home an armload of VHS tapes every night because she had to stay current on what the stock was so she could recommend stuff, answer questions. So we would go, she'd serve us ice cream, and then we'd take a big bag full of videos home. And that was like the best summer ever.
Yeah, it sounds like the best summer. We had a neighbor a couple houses down who had one of those dual VHS players. And so he would rent movies and record them illegally.
Oh, yeah.
and he had this massive book. because he had hundreds of them, hundreds of VHS tapes, and there were about 4 movies on every VHS. And so he had this book that he cataloged them in, and all we had to do was stop by and ask if we can look at the book, and he'd let us borrow movies.
Were you ever tempted to drop a dime to the FBI? Because every time you start a movie, it's like, if you know anyone involved in piracy, you can get a big reward.
At the time, I didn't even think of it as piracy
Mm-hmm.
because he wasn't making any money. He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't charging anybody. He just kept them for himself, and he let friends and family borrow them.
Sounds like a
So
pirate to
no,
me.
I never thought of it. Yeah, it is, but it didn't. I don't know. It didn't click to me. It didn't register at the time. I was very young.
That's before I think they started the aggressive anti-piracy education.
Yeah, as soon as it started getting a lot easier.
Yeah, when the internet became widespread, that's when it became part of the core curriculum. So, what got you into writing horror?
That is a longer and very boring story. I've always enjoyed horror growing up, mostly watching horror. I wasn't a big reader as a kid, which kind of upsets a lot of people, especially other writers. But I wasn't. I was the kid who was always outside and on my bike, and getting in my own head. I was writing my own stories all the time. And I wrote a couple short stories, but for the most part, I was outside. That imagination, though, didn't stop when I was a kid. It carried into my teens, and I kind of thought I was weird when I just sit in my room and imagine up these crazy scenarios for a couple hours on end. I wasn't even writing them down. I was just sitting alone and just thinking about these stories and these different adventures I could go on. And I became an adult. I tried my hand at art. I worked in the veterinary field for a while, and I didn't really do anything creative for a long time because life kind of took me on another path. And then in 2011, I had to become a stay-at-home mom out of necessity for a little while. That was great. I loved being home with my kids and spent a lot of time with them. But the domestic side of it got really boring really fast for me. I needed more. I wanted more out of it, and I missed being creative. And so I kind of went back to, well, what was I going to do when I graduated high school? What I wanted to do was to be a children's book writer because I like to do art. And so I did that. I wrote and self-published a children's book, and I tried my hand at children's books for a while, but I just wasn't feeling it. I wasn't very good at it. And a lot of the stories I was coming up with were becoming increasingly darker and darker and a little more adult than I wanted to put in children's lit. Not that you can't put darker themes in children's books, of course, but it wasn't working for me. And so eventually, around 2015, I started getting serious about writing adult fiction. And I just did some workshops. I joined local writing groups and took classes and tried to get better. And that's how I kind of started easing in.
I have read a fair amount of your work, and I've seen a lot of your illustrations as well. And it is wild to think that you were working in the children's book field for a while.
Yeah. It was one of those things I thought I was going to do when I was in high school because I liked drawing cartoony kind of characters, and I was always doodling those cartoons, and I just thought it was easy, take the art I did and write some children's stories. And I had kids, so I figured why not. Plus, I was inspired by our dog. The story that I wrote was called Drips, and it's about a dog who drools so much that nobody wants him.
Oh,
Like he floods the town, it's excessive drooling situation. And it was based off of our own dog because he was very drooly and very lovable, but nobody liked to pet him because he was kind of gross. And so when he was diagnosed with degenerative myelopathy, my heart broke a little bit that he spent his whole life with people pushing him away, not us, but everybody else outside of his immediate family kind of pushed him away because of his role.
you went from taking workshops and getting more serious about the craft to eventually founding Death Knell Press. What was your story with that?
It was COVID, basically. Was
COVID
the
baby.
story. So I'd been writing all along and submitting, and I felt like I was at this cusp in a way where I was getting more publications through short stories, but I wasn't quite venturing into that pro-paying field yet. I was kind of in between, and I got a little desperate right around COVID for a moment, thinking I need to do more. What if writing doesn't pay out? Because at the time I was substituting at local elementary schools, and that job was suddenly gone. So that income was gone during COVID. I started thinking of different pathways I could take, whether that be editing or even like publishing other people, because I had a run at self-publishing and I've self-published several books. I started looking at different options. And I had wanted to update my imprint that I was using for self-publishing anyway, because I was at the time read books when I was publishing under my legal name for children's books. But since I started publishing horror, I started using a different name, Red Lagoe. What I ended up doing was taking that imprint, and my plan was to keep doing what I was already doing, maybe self-publishing, but also trying to get myself traditionally published at the same time, using Death Knell Press as my imprint, but also using it as an opportunity to help other people get published. I got scared going into my 40s and having always turned away from all the things that I wanted to do and was too afraid to do because of financial risk or because of any risk, basically. I got to this point where I wanted to put out an anthology, Nightmare Sky. It was astronomy-based horror, and I really wanted to do it. I wanted to edit it. I wanted to do art for it. So I put together Death Knell Press as the publisher who would put it out. And my plan was to take out a very small business loan, something very modest, and get that off the ground. And then crisis kind of struck in our house. We had a major plumbing disaster that required us to take out a loan. It was a $14,000 plumbing disaster because all of our pipes run under a cement slab and the whole house had to be dug up. Yeah, it was it was a disaster. And so everything came to a screeching halt. And like I said, I got scared that I would never do all the little things that I wanted to do because I was too afraid of taking the risk. And so I decided to just do it anyway. I didn't take out the loan. I had to work with the little bit of money I had saved up, and I used it. I paid everything out of pocket, and I put out an anthology. So Death Knell is very small, and it's just me, and I don't have plans on making it some big press. For now, it's just going to be occasionally when I have the money to do it, I'm going to try to publish something.
Very cool. I feel like that origin story brings us directly to Arachnu. Let's dive into the collection. Impulses of a Necrotic Heart. Can you tell us about the story Arachnu?
Sure. Impulses of a Necrotic Heart is my short story collection that came out last year. And Arachnu is a fun story about one of my biggest fears, which is spiders. I have arachnophobia, and I've always had it. Some years I deal with it better than others. I start thinking I'm going to be able to handle this spider fear, and then all of a sudden a different spider comes along and I'm scared all over again. So I've always been afraid of spiders, and I've always been afraid to write a story about spiders. They tell you to write what you're afraid of. And so the first time I heard that as a new writer, the first time I heard that, I was like, I don't want to write a spider story. That's ridiculous. It's just going to be cheesy. But I wrote enough of the other sad and desolate kind of stories, and so I decided to write a spider one.
And there is a problem with a leak under a slab in the story, right?
There is. Yes, there is. It's very much based on our plumbing issues here. So the pipes under our house were cast iron, and the house was built in the 60s. The pipes underneath for the plumbing for the main line are cast iron. And as solid as that seems, it tends to rust away over time. And we didn't realize when we bought the house that that whole line was already pretty much rotted away. But also everything that goes through the line was seeping out. And so I just imagined this massive sinkhole forming underneath the house. And that's kind of where the story was born. There's a problem under the house, and a lot of spiders are gathering.
Specifically, wolf spiders.
Yes. Here we have grass spiders around our house. We have a lot of grass spiders. Some people call them wolf spiders. Some people call them grass spiders. They're very similar. I honestly don't know the difference. I've tried looking it up, but I can't even look at pictures of spiders long enough without getting kind of skeeved out. So.
Growing up in Connecticut, in that house that was surrounded by woods, definitely had wolf spiders. Huge wolf spider problem. My father was arachnophobic, and so as a result, we kind of all were arachnophobic. Um, and definitely have written my share of spider stories to kind of grapple with it.
Yeah, nobody else in the family was arachnophobic. I don't know exactly where it came from, but I have some suspicions. I remember a couple dreams I had as a kid, the spider crawling overhead while I was laying on the couch, and it just dropped on my face in my dream, and I woke up. I was definitely afraid of spiders after that moment, but I don't know if I was already afraid prior to that, because when I was really young, I used to let them crawl on me. I'd pick them up out of their
Okay.
webs and let them crawl up my arm. So I don't know what happened along the way
That is so
that made me so
interesting.
afraid of them.
Because in my experience, childhood exposure to certain creepy crawlies is what fixes it in your mind as an irrational obstacle. And creepy crawlies you encounter once you're an adult kind of just get lumped in with everything else. So I didn't grow
Hmm.
up with cockroaches. I grew up with wolf spiders.
Hmm.
Wolf spiders will make my skin crawl, but I see a cockroach, I'm like, oh, cool. It's like a weird little robot beetle, like waving its antenna around. But my wife grew up with cockroaches, and she's just utterly repulsed by them.
Yeah, cockroaches are horrible. We do get them down here. We don't have an infestation, but every once in a while, the really big ones, like the big water bug cockroaches, I guess there's a difference. They'll like try to get inside, and so every few months we'll get one, and it's horrifying. That is so disgusting. And sometimes they fly. It's
Yeah, yeah.
utter madness. Yeah,
When I went
it's
to
terrifying.
Hawaii, one of the first things I saw was a bunch of cockroaches flying around, and I was like, oh, dang, this place really is paradise. All right. The next story I want to talk about is Hollowed Hearts.
I wrote Hollowed Hearts for an invite to an anthology called Lunatic Lullabies. And they kind of asked me last minute to join, and so I wanted to throw something together, but as I started, it turned into more.
Mm.
And so Hollowed Hearts is a young boy who is neglected in a sense, but not intentionally. His mother is just overworked, single mom. She's overworked. She loves him. She tries to pay attention, but he's still kind of neglected because he doesn't get that time with her. And he's bullied, and he's very interested in the house across the street, which is this big Victorian style house with turrets, and there's bats in the backyard, and so he's kind of drawn there as he experiences some tormenting from kids in the neighborhood.
I thought it was a really sad, sweet story. I thought the language in it was so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very, very loosely inspired by my own experiences as a mother. I mean, how many times do parents have to say, well, not today. We're done with work for the day, and the child wants to play a game or wants to do something with you, and you just don't have the time on this particular day. So you say maybe tomorrow. And I started thinking, how many times can a mom say maybe tomorrow before it starts to take that toll on the child? And so I kind of dove really deep with that one. And took it to an extreme where he started seeking comfort in other places where he shouldn't be.
Switching gears from the small scale, Infectious Glow, your sci-fi thriller. This one kind of marries your love of horror and astronomy, right?
It does, yeah. I have several stories that kind of merge astronomy and horror together. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to put together an anthology of astronomical horror, is because it just works its way into my writing a lot. And so this one, it's kind of like a zombie story in a sense, a little bit. And I'm kind of a sucker for zombie stories. And it follows an old astronomer, Chuck, who has a heart condition, and he's out viewing the stars one night for a very specific event. It's Betelgeuse, the star, well, Betelgeuse, however you want to pronounce it. I like to say Beetlejuice. Goes supernova.
I prefer Betelgeuse because if we say it the other way too many times, then he'll appear.
Exactly. And so it goes supernova. So he's out there observing it, but there's something off with the light, and it's having an effect on anyone who looks at it. So this was a really fun one to just kind of dive into the, I guess, the pseudoscience that was behind what actually happened to all the people.
You've got two characters. It's a pretty tight setup. So you have your old astronomer who's bringing that wealth of knowledge, and then you have his young neighbor who is a student studying microbiology. And so together, they're the two perfect characters to try to come up with some explanation of what this weird phenomenon is, but also they need to get out of there. The situation is becoming dangerous and unstable. They have to help each other through this besieged city. I thought it was a really fun little thriller.
Thank you. I definitely had fun writing it. And I did like their dynamic, the two characters, because they're very different characters kind of thrown in the situation together, and they had to work it out. And that was another one it broke my heart a little at the end, the way it turned out. But I think I almost gave away the ending. Not that I don't know if it matters, but
No need to give away the ending, but I guess my follow-up question for you is, you're the one that wrote that ending. So it broke your heart, even though it was a choice you made. But do you feel like that was the story dictated what the best ending should be, and your hands were kind of tied?
yes, absolutely. I used to try to force it when I first started writing. I used to try to force a certain ending, and it followed the formula I kind of laid out when I started planning and plotting. But I found that if I just kind of stayed true to that emotional core of the story
Mm-hmm.
as I got further along in my writing, then it just always worked out for the better. Same with Hollowed Hearts. I think that one did really well with the ending because it broke my heart so much.
Yeah.
I couldn't see it ending any other way. And it was kind of left semi ambiguous as to what actually happened to him. But either way, it was just kind of devastating, and there was no other way to end it. I didn't feel.
Two stories I want to explore. They don't appear back to back. Don't Make It Weird and Bloodbogged.
Hmm.
These are two awesome stories that I feel like deserve their own special category.
Yeah, Don't Make It Weird is a coming of age kind of story about a girl who is developing. I think she's about 11 or 12 in the story, and she loves playing football. That's all she wants to do. She wants to go to summer camp. She wants to play football with the boys. But as she's getting older and her body changes, the boys don't treat her the same on the field. They've never really treated her equally on the field because she's a girl playing football. But as she gets older and her breasts start developing, it's even more awkward for her, and they start making it weird. And so it's about her body changing, and her body changing also in a kind of a paranormal way. And she gets fed up with it, and she learns to embrace the beast within
Well
and
said.
let the boys have it.
Well summarized. There's so many fun little turns. I guess it's because in a typical version of that story, you would expect her to be getting very reactive, but she really is there to play ball. They're discounting her, they're trying to exclude her, and she's like literally running plays on them and
Mhm.
hustling on the field and trying to bounce back from hard tackles and stuff like that. It's just a very cool character that you created. And then where it goes is very surprising and delightful.
This story was a rewrite. I had originally written it. It was not horror. It was just like a little piece of fiction I put online a while back, and it was called Developing on the Line of Scrimmage. And it was pretty close to a true story that happened to me when I was a teenager. I played with the boys. I loved playing football, and it was the same thing every single time I went to go play. Unless I knew every boy on the field and we'd been playing together for a long time, I had to prove myself. Any other guy could come on the field and start playing, and they'd throw him the ball. It didn't matter if he was any good or not. They would throw him the ball. They would give him a chance. But when I was playing, I wasn't given the time of day. I had to prove myself over and over again. And if I made one mistake, that was it. That was
Mm.
my one chance. And I didn't get thrown the ball again forever. And so it's really frustrating being a girl playing football. And that happened to me. I had the wind knocked out of me, and they told me not to play anymore. And I was back up. I was like, no, I'm going to play. They're like, no, no, you're a girl. That's what happens. I was so infuriated. And I did not have beasts inside of me at that time. So I couldn't do anything about it.
possibly related to that is your story Bloodbogged, which I think
Mhm.
might be my favorite story in the collection.
Yeah, Bloodbogged is the bloodiest story I've ever written. And I stand by the fact that every ounce of blood dropped was necessary.
Mm,
Bloodbogged is a story about a young woman in college, and she has an inappropriate relationship with her professor. He's been very manipulative of her and pressures her into a sexual situation. Because of that, she starts bleeding excessively. This is supernatural, and it's kind of nothing's explained scientifically here. There's a lot of metaphors going on. But she starts bleeding excessively when she gets her period, and I mean biblical amounts of blood, like swimming pools full of blood. And so she runs off to a cabin. It's his cabin that he took her to a long time ago. And she stays there to try to ride it out. It's her coming to the realization of why she's suffering the way she is
mhm.
and trying to learn that the things that happened to her were not her fault.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and I haven't read one like it. Definitely the bloodiest story I've ever read as well.
Yeah.
It's not a very long story, but the way you write about blood in the quantities and the qualities that you describe it in, it could get repetitive really quickly, and it never does. I think that story should be shared in horror writing classes because you write about blood in such a rainbow of ways. It's so expansive and it never
Thank you.
gets old or tired. It is visceral throughout, which is incredible. And it's got that great emotional core. You know, you don't know why she's there at first, and it unfolds, and everything feels earned, and there's that really cool payoff. But yeah, Bloodbog was my favorite in the collection.
Thank you. I I was worried about that when I was writing it. Like, how many ways can I say blood? How many ways can I say red?
Apparently
And
a
so
lot.
I had to make a list. I was so nerdy about it. I had fun putting together Impulses of a Necrotic Heart.
Hmm.
I think these stories have more heart. I was a little more willing to get more vulnerable with
Hmm.
the stories and like let my emotions kind of pour into them.
A theme I noticed was that characters tend to embrace the monstrous, literally, and don't make it weird, and in stories like Bloodbogged.
Mhm.
Would it be too far of a stretch to say that has something to do with this idea of the monstrous feminine?
I don't think it's that far of a stretch. My experience as a woman is going to come into stories because going back to early on when I said they told me to write what I'm afraid of, right?
Mm,
When I first started writing horror, write what you're afraid of, and I first thought, well, I'm afraid of spiders. That's ridiculous.
hmm.
But what am I really afraid of? I'm afraid of, as a mother, I'm afraid of losing my kids. As a woman, I'm afraid of walking into a parking lot alone at night. There's a lot of things I'm afraid of. And so, yeah, those experiences as a woman are going to turn into horror stories for me when I write them. And some of that comes out as rage. And some is going to be more just heartbreaking and tragic.
It's there in your story, Dogwood. It's there
Mhm.
in Here for You. It's all throughout this collection.
Thank you.
So, can you tell me about your upcoming novella, In Excess of Dark? Because that is going to drop any day now.
Yeah, In Excess of Dark comes out through Darklit Press in March. This one it is about a woman suffering from grief and the darkness within her kind of filling up, and she starts to experience things. She starts to experience her worst nightmares. So she'll have really explicit daydreams and they start coming true. And it's about her kind of choosing to try to wield this power. She sees it as an ability to bring back those that she's lost, or to at least get to see them again.
So, would you say she's embracing the monstrous and
I
strange?
would say so, yeah.
Ah,
Something happened over the past couple years where I just started embracing the monster.
Do you think as you started to develop your own art style for horror stories, that went hand in hand with this idea of cultivating this dark side? Because you're not just doing it in word, you also have these awesome horror illustrations.
I love illustrating. It's always been something I've done, doodling and drawing. And it wasn't until a few years ago when I started writing that I started kind of easing back into art too. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I really started trying to learn again. So my art education kind of stopped at college, and I never really did anything with it for at least a decade or more. And so it was really nice to get back into it, but I was still at the same level that I was drawing in high school, and so I'm learning and I'm growing. But I do enjoy taking the scenes that I see in my head when I'm writing, because I'm very, very visual when I write. Everything kind of comes to me as visual scenes first before words. And so I love taking that and making it into art.
You have another project coming out, Bloodstains by Gaslight.
Bloodstains by Gaslight, that's coming out in July through Brigade's Gate Press. And it is a story about teen relationship violence and abuse. So it gets pretty deep, but it's told through the lens of a vampire's tale. It's about a young girl. Well, she's 18, so she's still in high school, and she's in an abusive relationship already. She's been with him for several years. He's abusive. She knows she has to get away, and she's about to break up with him, but he is turned into a vampire and becomes more powerful and more controlling than ever. And so this is a story about her being trapped in that relationship. It's not romantic. There's nothing sparkly. it's it's uh it's it's told from some some things that I experienced when I was in high school. I was in an abusive relationship for 6 years, and so I bled a little bit when I wrote this story.
Was it cathartic?
uh, Maybe not. I don't know. I don't think this one was cathartic. Maybe a little bit. There is definitely some therapy to it. It forced me to recognize some of my own decisions that I made at the time while writing why this girl was choosing to do what she was doing. Um, so a lot of what I experienced when I was a teenager, I had already come to terms with. I stopped being angry about it a long, long time ago. He was also just a broken teen at the time. So it's nothing that I try to dwell on, but it is something that still affects me to this day. So yeah, so writing it, I felt it needed to be written.
That is such an interesting angle on the vampire story. So often there's this power fantasy of, ooh, what if I became a vampire? Or what if I was courted by a vampire? I don't think I've ever heard of a story about someone who is in an abusive situation who then has to confront a vampire. And it's not a stranger, it's not a European noble. It hits right there close to home and it's totally personal. Yeah, that sounds like a hell of a setup for a novel.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm working on edits right now. I just got the edits back
Oh,
last
cool.
week, so I was working on edits today. We should have something to put out in the world soon in the way of arcs, and then it releases in July.
Very cool.
I'm really nervous about this one coming out. I'm so
Oh,
nervous.
yeah. It's a lot of yourself in it.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there's a lot.
Well, it sounds incredible, and I'm sure you wrote the hell out of it.
It's not something I talked about a lot, and a lot of people that I knew from childhood, they don't know. So we'll see what happens.
It'll be an interesting summer, if nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And finally, another new project you have on the horizon is The Devil's Backbone.
I think it was the end of 2022, Ronald Kelly reached out to me and said that he and Laurel Hightower were going to be writing these Appalachian horror novellas that were going to be part of the Dark Tide series through Crystal Lake Publishing. Their stories were part of this world called the Devil's Backbone. And they asked if I would contribute because Ronald Kelly created this fictional mountain range that runs from Tennessee through Virginia and Kentucky. And each of us are from those respective states. And so we each wrote a story based in our state that takes place along this evil, mysterious mountain range where terrible things happen. And so my story takes place in the early 1970s while Vietnam is kind of coming to an end slowly. And there's this area of the mountain where people keep going missing, and I can't say anything else because it'll just give things away. But there's a part of the mountain called the Devil's Bathtub, which is actually a real place. It's in Virginia. It's in Western Virginia where this fictional mountain range, Devil's Backbone, would be. And so this bathtub, this water hole in the woods, makes people kind of lose their minds and see things. And it's about this kid trying to keep his family together, trying to keep his little town together while his brother is off to war. That comes out on the 23rd of February.
Very cool. I hope to get a chance to explore that in more depth on the podcast in a coming episode. So you now live in the area that I refer to as Spook Central in Virginia, where the Appalachians overlap with colonial history. Pound for pound or mile for mile, I don't think there are more ghosts and monsters anywhere else in the country that I'm aware of. Do you have a favorite local legend or cryptid?
So I'm a little further east. I'm closer to the water out near Virginia Beach. And there is a local legend, but it's not really a paranormal one. She's called the Witch of Pungo. And the Witch of Pungo has a real name. Her name is Grace Sherwood. And she was the only witch, or the only woman, who was tried by ducking in water in Virginia. People kept accusing her of witchcraft. Animals were falling sick, and so the neighbors blamed it on her. She was a woman who grew herbs and healed people with herbal medicine, and she wore pants when she farmed. And so in the late 1600s, early 1700s, everybody thought that was weird. Someone accused her of turning into a cat and sneaking into their house in the middle of the night. And so the townspeople kept trying to accuse her of witchcraft, and it kept getting dismissed. And so she would countersue for defamation. And eventually, enough people kept complaining about her that they said, okay, well, we'll just throw you in the water and see if you sink. And so that's what they did. They threw her in, tied her thumbs together, and she didn't sink. And I guess they threw a Bible around her neck, and she started to sink after they threw the Bible around her neck, but she broke loose from her bonds and swam to shore and was thrown in jail for like 8 years for being a witch. So that's the Witch of Pungo. It's not paranormal, but
it's a bit of witchy history.
Devastating.
Oh, there goes my cat. That's Pongo. Pongo's got something to say. Yeah. So where can our listeners find out more?
I am at redlagoe.com, or I'm at Red Lagoe across social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads, but I don't really use them that much yet.
Just waiting for that day.
Yeah, I've got the name, I've got my little placeholders, so I can't do all the social media.
Same.
It's too much time.
Yeah, same. Well, Red, thank you for coming on, and thank you for giving us a peek into your many, many exciting projects.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please subscribe and follow. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.